Did you just use your entire army's shooting just to kill a single Gretchen? Congratulations, you might have trust issues. Or you didn't make the most out of your shooting phase. And in this video, we're going to fix that. Well, the second part, not the first part. For this, you might want to see a therapist. In today's video, we're going to learn how to make the most out of your shooting phase. We will talk target priority, orders of operations, which questions to ask your opponent, and so much more. And we will do so with actual real-life miniatures on an actual tabletop. My name is Damien Cooper and welcome to another video of the Tactical Doctrine. Since this video is probably going to be long and complex, let's not waste any more time and dive right in. To plan for our shooting phase, here is the very first thing you should do every time before you even start moving your models. You should ask your opponent about all of their defensive strats and abilities and everything that could make your shooting phase absolute hell. Here are some of the examples. One would be the lone operative ability. Have you ever moved up your tank just to get line of sight onto a single target just for them to tell you in the shooting phase that it has lone up and you're out of range? Well, I certainly have experienced that in the past. Another thing that I tend to forget are reactive moves, and there are some abilities in the game that when you shoot a unit, then they get to reactive move afterwards. And maybe you just run around, you just shoot a single pistol at them, but you have lined up your entire rest of the army to shoot that unit to death, and then they reactive move out of line of sight, and nothing else can shoot them anymore. So ask your opponent all of these questions before you even start moving your models and line up your shots. Another thing to consider is shoot back abilities, for example. You shoot them, they don't die, they shoot you back. Votan have a couple of those abilities, but there's also other armies in the game that can do this. And then of course there's all the standard abilities like stealth, AOC, smoke keywords, so things that make your shooting and your damage output worse, which are also things to consider before you move your models to actually put some damage into an opponent's unit. Now that we have all the information, we need to make a plan. And that could also be dependent on our secondaries. Do we need to do some actions? But we'll talk about this a little later. But also target priority. What needs to die? What do we really need to kill? Where do we want to be? And where do we want to position our models? And after we have made this plan and we know what needs to happen and what we need to accomplish in our shooting phase or in our turn in general, we can start moving our models. Now we need to move our models so that all of them have targets. And here I always highly recommend talking to your opponent. Once you move your tank in line of sight of that opponent's unit, you declare that the intent is for this unit to shoot certain units. So you just move it and you tell them, okay, I moved my predator here and it has line of sight on this unit, and that unit. Because sometimes maybe you see things differently and you forgot that there's a terrain piece in the way, but your opponent reminds you of it, and then you can just work together if you can get an angle on all of your opponent's units. Just don't start moving your models assuming that this is what needs to happen, and then when the shooting phase comes around you realized, oh, I can't see that unit, or that unit does have cover but I thought it didn't. Just talk to your opponent because you're playing this game together. Other things you might already want to consider in the movement phase are special abilities of your weapons, like rapid fire. Do you have the heavy keyword? Do you even need to move your tank, or would you rather have the +1 to hit ability? Some units might have an ability that when you're targeting the closest eligible target, they do get buffed. So do consider this when moving your models in place. The last thing to still consider in your movement phase are advances. If your unit doesn't have the assault keyword or any other way to get advance and shoot, then you really need to think about if that unit wants to shoot something, or if it doesn't matter and you can just advance it to get to a point or to get into a better position for the next turn, but you need to consider this before moving your models. So now we have moved all of our models in place, everything has targets, so now let's actually start the shooting phase. One subsection of this that I see a lot of people make mistakes in is the order of operations. Does my unit have only one target that it can shoot at, or do I have multiple targets to choose from? So here I would highly recommend choosing all of your units that only have a singular target, because you don't want to shoot with a tank first that has multiple targets, then kill an enemy unit so that this one tank that can only shoot at this unit can't shoot that unit anymore because it's already dead. Because if you shoot that unit first, then you might actually kill that unit so that your tank with multiple options can just shoot somewhere else. Number 2. Do you have any buffs to apply? Because there are a lot of abilities in the game that make the shooting of your other units better. If I shoot you with my Predator first, then the rest of my army gets better armor penetration. Or if that unit shoots a unit, then you don't have the benefit of cover against any other attacks coming afterwards. Those are all things to consider when it comes to the order of operation. So think about what buffs you need to apply and then start acting accordingly. Another really big and important thing is, will my line of sight change once I activate a unit? Let's say we have two Predator Destructors. Both of our Predators can see the opponent's big brick of 20 boys, but only one can see the entire unit, whereas the others can only see a couple of boys. Now if we start shooting with a Predator that can see all of the boys first, our opponent might just remove the casualties in a way where our second Predator isn't able to shoot the boys anymore at all because they can't see them anymore. So here we need to start shooting with the model that has the least amount of line of sight and then activate the one that sees more than that. So here whenever we want to shoot our opponent's infantry units with more than one of our own units, ideally we want to have line of sight onto their characters, if the unit has one, because that is the one that they cannot pull before all of the bodyguard models die. So this way we can make sure that all of our units can shoot even if they remove casualties first. Another thing to consider are weapon abilities like Blast. Do we have two of our units lined up to shoot that big brick of 20 boys, but only one of them has Blast? Then you might want to shoot the unit with Blast first, so that we can get the maximum out of it. Because if we shoot the unit that doesn't have Blast first, they will remove casualties, and then our Blast weapons don't get the maximum potential. The next thing we want to talk about is which weapons to shoot first if our unit has multiple weapons with multiple characteristics like different damage output or different armor penetration. If you're shooting everything into a single opponent's unit like a monster or a tank, then it probably doesn't matter. But if they have multiple models with different wound characteristics and maybe also different armor saves, then it does matter a lot. In our first example, we're going to shoot a Predator Destructor into a unit of knobs led by a war boss. And they are in the war, so they all have a 5-up invul, so our armor penetration doesn't matter. But our damage output does. Every knob has 2 wounds, but one has already taken damage, so he's down to 1 wound. The war boss, however, has 6 wounds. So here we want to make sure that we're not wasting any damage. So if we start shooting with our Predator's last cannons first, we will just deal 5 to 6 damage to that one knob that was on 1 wound. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So what we want to do is we want to start our damage 1 weapons first, like the Storm Bolters and the Havoc Launcher. So once the 1 wound knob is dead, then we start going to our Predator autocannon that deals 3 damage. So each shot and wound that goes successfully through will kill a knob. And then at the very end we will shoot our last cannons because they have the highest potential damage, and maybe we can just use one of our last cannons to kill the war boss by itself. If we're shooting an opponent's unit that has multiple save characteristics, it might get a bit more tricky. Because in our next example, we're shooting a unit of Plague Marines that is being led by a lot of Poxes. The Plague Marines have a 3-up armor save and they have no invul, but the Lord of Boxes does have a 4-up invul. And usually I would recommend shooting the lower damage weapons first and then do the high AP weapons, but here they might get lost. Because we might shoot our lower AP weapons first and then we kill the Plague Marines, but then our higher AP weapons that go into the Lord of Boxes will just be saved on a 4-up anyway, because he does have a 4-up invul. So here it might be smarter to shoot our last cannons first, because the Plague Marines only get a 6-up save against it, and we don't want to save it for last, because then maybe we kill all of the Plague Marines, but the Lord of Boxes will save on a 4-up anyway. And the Lord of Boxes will also save on a 4-up against our Predator's autocannon. If you're not sure in which order you should shoot your guns, then I would just suggest as a general rule of thumb to shoot your weakest weapons first and then move up to the higher damage and higher AP weapons last. And just as a side note, even though this might be very annoying, we want to even consider this when shooting into a single target, like a vehicle. Because we want to get our small damage and low AP weapons out of the way to know how much damage we did exactly. Because then in the end, maybe we have a last cannon that has a variable roll of damage. So we want to save this for last because maybe we rolled too little on the damage and we want to consider a command reroll for this. And we don't want to start shooting this weapon first and roll a 2, but then we know, we still have the Storm Bolters and all the little guns, maybe they do enough damage. So you want to just shoot them first to have all the information if you want a CP reroll on a hit, wound, or damage roll later on in the activation. The last thing to note when it comes to the order of operation of things is split firing. Split firing means you have a unit with multiple weapons and you want to shoot them into different targets at the same time. Here it is important that you declare all of your targets before you start shooting. You can't just shoot the last cannons and see if that kills the tank, and if it doesn't, then you keep shooting your other guns. Before you start rolling dice, you need to declare where each weapon is going. So let's say our last cannons are going into our opponent's tank, whereas the Predator autocannon is going into an infantry unit. One more thing to consider are offensive stratagems. Do you have anything to make your unit shooting better? Or do you need to do something before you start shooting? Apply a stratagem or throw a grenade. And I think this one has happened to every single one of us. We start shooting a unit, we don't kill them, and then, maybe I should have thrown a grenade before. But you need to decide to throw the grenade before you start shooting. And this is also something where I personally wouldn't ask for a takeback, because now you have information that you didn't have before, because now you know that your unit didn't kill the unit in shooting, so you want to throw a grenade afterwards. And this is not how it works. One very important thing to think about in our shooting phase are secondaries and do I need to do actions. We have all been overcome by Khorne at some point in our Warhammer 40k career and just started blasting and fighting, and then at the end of the fight phase you realized, wait, what were my secondaries again? Did I even draw any? Because we just have been overcome by bloodlust and just want to kill. But we need to also consider if we need to do some actions, because you can't do an action and shoot, so this is something worth considering. So in my shooting phase, I plan out which unit wants to shoot and which unit wants to do an action. And I usually use visible aids to actually remind me of this, because it also has happened to me a lot that I want this truck to recover assets or do another action, and then mid through the shooting phase, I just start shooting as big shooters, and then I realize, damn, that 0 damage that I just dealt just cost me 3 victory points because I wasn't able to do an action. So here just put a die next to it or something that says action, so that I am reminded that this unit wants to declare an action instead of actually shooting. And just a quick tip, you declare your actions at the very end of your shooting phase, because maybe you do need the redundancy and your opponent just survived on 1 wound, and then you might want to consider shooting that truck just to kill them off instead of doing the action, because maybe getting rid of that opponent's unit is more important than the 2 to 3 victory points. Another rather special interaction I want to talk about are transports. Are you planning on killing a transport in the shooting phase, so that you can then charge the contents and kill them later? Because if you do, then you really need to make sure that you do have enough guns pointing at that transport, so you make sure it actually dies. Because if it doesn't, then you leave it on a couple of wounds, and you are forced with your high damage dealing melee unit to charge the transport just to kill it, so that the unit that pops out can then act normal in your opponent's turn. You didn't really accomplish anything. Or are you just planning to kill the transport and then kill the unit that comes out? You also need to consider that you have enough guns pointing in that direction, and you also have line of sight of where that unit will be once they disembarked, so that you do have enough redundancy to actually kill both the transport and the unit inside. And the last thing to consider here is, does the board state change once you pop the transport? Because sometimes you kill the transport just because you have a gun pointing at it, but then the contents pop out and they just disembark onto a point where your opponent wasn't sitting before, and now they score a number of victory points for primary in their turn more than they would have if you wouldn't have shot the transport at all. So here are the last things to consider when it comes to mastering your shooting phase. And this is, do I even need to or want to shoot my opponent? One example would be that you're exposing a very valuable shooting asset of yours just to kill some unimportant chaff that won't really do anything next turn anyway. But then they can react and kill your very valuable shooting unit, and you very much trade it down. So here you want to consider, is it even worth exposing my shooting assets or keep them for later? And the last example would be shooting a unit that you want to charge later, because maybe they can remove casualties and thus make your charge longer, when your melee unit is very likely to just overkill that unit anyway in combat. So here you might be better off not shooting that unit at all, not to risk them losing morals and making your charge longer. Alright, that was a lot of information and certainly a lot to remember, but there's absolutely no shame in helping you remember something by writing physical notes somewhere. What I have done in the past is write physical sticky notes and put them down in my dice tray. Your opponent has a reactive move after shooting, write it down, put it in your dice tray. Before you roll your dice, you see, oh wait, do I actually want to shoot them? Same thing goes for actions, it goes for your own stratagems that you might want to forget, or any of the things that we talked about in this video. So this is the end of the video, and I hope you liked it, and if you did, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you learned something, please consider subscribing, because there will be so much more content like this, as well as other general 40k content, because here at High Stakes 40k, we are all in on Warhammer.